thanks to the library for bringing me here, and thank you for coming. Thanks for both of you for being here too. I really appreciate it. When I was people are wondering, so you wrote a book about the Red Sox. You're from Cleveland, Ohio, and I've been here only 5 weeks in New England. So what are you doing writing books about the Red Sox, right? And I have to tell them I had an unbelievable experience when I was 10 years old. My dad used to take us on vacations every year, somewhere we go on a vacation somewhere in the U.S., but mostly to New England because my dad loved New England. And in 1967, coincidentally enough, the Impossible Dream season for the Red Sox, my dad took us to Boston on vacation that June. And he took me to Fenway Park because he knew how much I loved baseball. And he took me to Fenway Park, and I was just beside myself. I was like, look at this ballpark. This is a real ballpark. This isn't like that big cavernous municipal stadium in Cleveland that had no personality and no nuances, no nothing. It was just a big, just 80,000 seats and like 2,000 people would show up to games, and this is great. I was just so excited. I told my dad, look, you could walk right off the street into Fenway Park. You used to have to walk like a mile to get to Cleveland Stadium, and it was, terrible. And I was just in love with it. And then when we got into Fenway Park, it was another sensory delight for me because I saw all these nuances of the ballpark. Municipal Stadium was just this big round bowl. Fenway Park had the Citgo sign and the pesky pole and the green monster and the way the stands jutted out towards center field, and had so much personality that I was so excited. The fans were filling up the seats, and the Red Sox were having a really good start to the season in '67 that ended in the Impossible Dream, and I always remembered that. And it was I became a Red Sox fan after that. I mean, I was still a Cleveland baseball fan, which I still am, but I really love the Red Sox, and ever since then I always have, and. So anyway, when I was in high school, I kind of put two and two together, which I could do by the time I was in high school. And I loved sports and I loved to write. And I said, I'll become a sports writer. And I went to Ohio University, which had this great journalism school, and I graduated after 12 and a half years. And no, it was really 4 years and 1 quarter, actually. And I became a sports writer in the newspaper business in Cleveland for about 17 years, actually. And I covered the Cleveland Indians very, very extensively. And when I was covering the Indians, I could not wait to get to Boston. Fenway Park, partly because of that experience I had in '67, and partly because I just loved the ballpark so much, was my favorite place to go. I couldn't wait to get to Boston. I didn't like the traffic in Boston, driving around there. It was tough. But other than that, I just loved going to Fenway Park, and I covered like some playoff games with the Red Sox, and I just, it was always my favorite place to go, my favorite destination. And in 2002, I quit the newspaper business because, it was starting to tank. You could tell with the internet coming in, there was going to be problems being in the newspaper business. And so I quit, and I started writing a lot of books, including the Ultimate Boston Red Sox Time Machine book, and doing programs for wonderful people like you. There was one exception, however. From 2009 to 2012, I hooked up with CBSSports.com, and they started covering NFL teams on a full-time basis, and they had me covering the Cleveland Browns. So I was covering the Cleveland Browns, as opposed to a football team. It was like, the movie Groundhog Day? The guy wakes up, he's in the same day. That's what it was like covering the Browns for 4 years. It was like the same, it was, 4 different seasons, but it was the same year. Each, 4 and 12, 5 and 11. They were terrible. They were out of the race by midseason. That's what it was like covering the Cleveland Browns. And then after 4 years, CBS ended that experiment with individuals covering NFL teams, and they put me on fantasy sports. So I started giving fantasy baseball and football advice online. And then in 2015, CBS Sports called me and they said, you have to move to Jacksonville, Florida. That's our new policy. You have to work where our headquarters are in Jacksonville, Florida. I said, I can't do that. I got a family to raise here. I'm in Cleveland. I have things to do here. I can't just up and move to Jacksonville, And they said, well, that's the end of that. So I ended that relationship with CBS Sports, and I just kept doing what I'm doing now, writing books and talking to wonderful people like you. So there you go. Now, I want to start the program, and what I want to do first, I want to talk about Red Sox Nation, because a lot of people think that Red Sox Nation was born in 1967 with the Impossible Dream season. But when I researched the book, it really was not. It was actually American League was born in 1901 because there was a guy named Michael McGreevy, and he was a saloon owner at the Third Base Saloon in Boston. And he formed the very first baseball fan club really ever in American history, called the Royal Rooters, out of his saloon. And the Royal Rooters were just passionate Boston baseball fans, and they used to travel with the team to like New York or Pittsburgh or wherever they would go to play, and they would travel with the team and heckle the opposing team. And in Boston, they would actually, in home games, they would sit behind the catcher, like in front of the stands, way behind the catcher. And so then when it was a foul pop-up, or that the opposing team hit, they would like just bat the ball away, and prevent the catcher from, prevent the guy from making the catch. And they were passionate. Here's a little bit more about Michael McGreevy. His nickname was Nuff Said, because whenever there was a baseball argument in his saloon, he would make his point, and then he would say, "Nuff said," and that was the end of the argument. Here's a little bit more about Nuff Said McGreevy and the Royal Rooters.
The Royal Rooters appeared to be a first. They would march up Ruggles Street to the new stadium, and they would have a marching band with them. McGreevy had his shillelagh to lead the procession. Nuff Said was clearly an organizer, and he was the final authority.
They were trying to be obnoxious. They were trying to, drive people from New York and Pittsburgh crazy, and they did a really good job of it.
McGreevy's saloon looked like Cheers after a Victorian interior decorator had gotten a hold of it.
Our boys will beat you on the field, we'll beat you off the field and take your money home with us.
Gambling was big business.
So you had John F. Kennedy's grandfather was a member of the Royal Rooters.
Just Grandpa's presence gave a special bit of panache to the Royal Rooters.
It was an extremely democratic organization. Democratic, it allowed everyone to behave like a rowdy.
They sort of were the Johnny Appleseeds of this relation between the fans and sports.
These men were fine men, they had great personality.
They were very emotional. They went to Pittsburgh, they went by train to New York.
They were examples of second-generation Irish who really made Boston what it is today.
The Roxbury Rooters, they rallied around the fact that there was this fire, and that not only were they going to root for the baseball team, but they're rallying together to pull together the community after extremely devastating fire.
And they had the fire that really devastated the ballpark back then. But anyway, the team was great. When the American League was born, they played in the very first World Series. They won the very first World Series ever played against Pittsburgh, and they won 4 championships during that stretch before Babe Ruth was sold to the Yankees at the day after Christmas in 1919. And they had some fabulous players and fabulous teams. And Fenway, after Fenway was built, they maintained their strength. In fact, they won the championship that year. But anyway, they really became a powerhouse when Babe Ruth arrived. And it's funny because Babe Ruth arrived the same way he left. He was actually bought by the Red Sox the same way that he was bought by the New York Yankees in 1919. He was bought from an industrial team in Baltimore. And in 1914, and it was an unusual situation because Babe Ruth was a fabulous left-handed pitcher. He was a Hall of Fame caliber pitcher. And the Red Sox didn't know what to do with him because it became apparent after a few years in baseball, even just a couple of years, that he could possibly revolutionize the sport as a slugger, because it was the dead ball era. Nobody was hitting home runs. You know, there was a team, an entire team would hit 10, 12 home runs the entire year. Maybe some guy would lead the team with 2 or 3 home runs. That was it. And Babe Ruth changed baseball. He was revolutionizing baseball with his uppercut swing and with his power, and they didn't know what to do with it. So anyway, in 1919, they finally relented and allowed him to play outfield. And he hit 27 home runs, and he was just incredibly, I mean, he was changing baseball. He was bringing fans into the stands. He was changing everything, but I want to talk a little bit about why the Red Sox sold Babe Ruth, because the common reason is not really the entire reason why they sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. But here's a little bit more about the early days of Boston baseball and their amazing success that they had during those days in the first couple decades of Red Sox baseball.
When Van Johnson created the American League, he determined very early on that the team in Boston was going to be one of his flagship franchises. Boston had this aura that they were the team that was always going to win. One way or another, Boston was going to come out on top.
With great pitching and defense, Boston won 5 of the first 15 World Series, including 1903 with the immortal Cy Young on the mound. In 1912, the Sox christened Fenway Park with a second championship and won again in 1915, 1916, and 1918. The pitching star of that team was Babe Ruth, who the Sox had bought from an industrial league in Baltimore in 1914. Ruth was only 19 years old, but he won big right away.
He won 18 games. Next year, 1916 and 1917, he won 23 and 24 games. In the World Series in 1918, he pitched a shutout and then pitched 7 scoreless innings to extend his scoreless streak to 29 innings, which was the record for more than 40 years. He was a sensational pitcher, but his hitting began to take over, and he loved to hit. He loved the sense of hitting.
In 1919, the Babe led the American League with 29 home runs, which was more than all but 5 teams in baseball. Ruth was the Red Sox principal attraction, the team's biggest draw. But prior to the 1920 season, Boston owner Harry Frazee, a New York theater producer, sold Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees. That single transaction, perhaps the most famous and curious in sports history, defined the Red Sox franchise. And Frazee, from that moment on, he was pegged Boston's all-time villain, the buffoon who peddled the Babe.
He cared more about his theater ventures than he did his baseball team, and saw a chance to get a lot of cash and had to go with it.
It was a sad news. They were taking all their chance of winning in the big leagues out of their hands. They were turning it over to New York.
Okay, first of all, I want to give you a trivia question. You guys ready for the first trivia question? Here we go. Let's do this one. In 1995, the Red Sox had a big, burly first baseman who won Most Valuable Player award in the American League. What was his name?
Move on.
Uh-oh, I don't think I'm going to slide anything by this guy. Okay, all right, I'm going to have to make it a little tougher for you. Move on. That is the right
answer.
answer.
In your book, too. You do have a picture of him.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I gave it away.
So I was browsing through.
Yeah, move on.
That's his name.
That's the right answer.
He had a
Good
connection
job.
to Lawrence, you know, I believe.
What's that?
He owned some property here in
Oh,
Lawrence.
okay.
I believe he did invest
move
here in
on.
Lawrence. I don't know if he still does. I'm not positive if it was him or one of the Red Sox.
Yeah. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about why they sold Babe Ruth. That is correct. Harry Frazee had a theater business on Broadway. And he was such a big New York guy anyway. He used to brag, oh, I can't wait to get back to New York. You know, even though he owned the Red Sox, he loved New York. And that's not why he wanted them to have Babe Ruth. That would have been really dishonest, but he didn't do it that way. But Babe Ruth wanted his salary doubled because now he was playing every day. and he was demanding that. So Frazee didn't want to do that. And there were a lot of like moralistic people, supposedly, in the area, and they didn't like Babe Ruth because he was a womanizer and a gambler, and he used to swear a lot, and he used to visit brothels and everything, and they thought he was a bad influence on the kids and even the adults of the area. So they were pressuring Frazee to get rid of him. And of course he did. And the upshot of what happened when they got rid of Babe Ruth was that Frazee kept selling off players to the Yankees. And the Red Sox not only had the worst stretch of baseball in their own history, but it was one of the worst stretches of baseball in the history of the sport. From 1920 to 1933, they were beyond awful. They finished last most of those seasons. They lost over 100 games several of those times, about half of those seasons, which is hard to do in a 154-game schedule, but they did. And they were just pathetic, absolutely pathetic. By the mid-1930s, they kind of bounced back. The Philadelphia A's were doing a sale, a garage sale or so, as well. And they got Jimmy Fox and Lefty Grove, a great pitcher, and Jimmy Fox, one of the great sluggers. The Red Sox got him too, and they started turning things around. But it wasn't until 1939 that they began their stretch of really great baseball, and that's greatly because they brought up a kid named Ted Williams. And Ted Williams is thought to be, by I think majority of baseball experts, the greatest pure hitter who ever lived. I mean, there were hitters who had better batting averages during the dead ball era, but he had the greatest combination of batting average and power maybe ever seen on a baseball field, at least until the steroid era, which I thought was a bastardization of the game anyway. And in 1939, he came up as a rookie and had 145 RBIs, which is crazy for a rookie. And then in 1941, he batted .406. And what happened in 1941 was the last day of the season, he went into the last day of the season batting exactly .400. And the manager named Joe Cronin, who later became the commissioner of the American League, Joe Cronin said, "I'll tell you what, Ted, this is a meaningless doubleheader. Why don't you sit it out and you can bat .400. And Ted says, "I don't work that way. That's not the way I am. I want to bat .400 to the last day of the season." And he got 6 hits in the doubleheader against Philadelphia, and he batted .406. And no one has ever since batted .400 again. And here's a little bit more about Ted Williams. He was such a passionate baseball hitter. He ate, drank, and thought baseball all the time and hitting all the time. And here's a little bit more about his greatness as a player, and also his struggles as a human being in some ways too.
Anticipation, I guess that was it, the anticipation of what might happen.
He was almost a godlike figure.
He's a baseball god.
He was a beauty to watch.
His swing was a work of art.
His bat being the brush and Fenway Park is the canvas. He was obsessed with hitting.
He was so focused, and when you're that focused, you can't really be a great husband. When you're that focused, you're not really a great father.
He actively concealed that he was Mexican-American.
Ted Williams' parents never saw him play a single game of Major League Baseball.
He had boiling anger.
The world hates me, everybody's against me, and I'm gonna show them.
He said in order to hit 400, he says you gotta be loose.
When he walked in the room, even if you didn't know one thing about baseball, you'd say, "That's somebody. Who's that?"
Any sport, anything really, whether it be tying a fly, he wanted to be the best.
I got down too low, and I got him a small ground fire.
The plane was on fire.
I said, "Oh, for the goddamn Christ, this is the time to let Teddy ball game, Major."
So I said, "You are John Wayne." And he goes, "Yeah, I know it." It is really, really difficult to be the queen on the chessboard.
When people criticized him, he lashed out at them.
I think he was lonely. I think that he had a difficulty making attachments.
It was not that big a crowd that day, only about 10,000. But they were all standing, and you knew what they wanted. And can you deliver in that situation?
He wasn't the kind of person that would go, "Oh, I'm sorry, come here, I'll give you a hug." Well, God damn it, why are you mad? Why are you upset? What happened?
And his hands were bleeding.
Perhaps one day we might see him again.
Everything about him is interesting in this gnarled, difficult way. What's the matter with him? What you constantly ask about that?
What's wrong with this guy? What a weirdo. What a great hitter.
Now, partly because of what the selling of Babe Ruth by the Red Sox went through many, many years where they only won one pennant because the Yankees started the dynasty in 1923 after they got Lou Gehrig, and they started a dynasty in 1923 that really lasted 41 years. I mean, from 1923 to 1964, the Yankees won most of the pennants, and it was, sort of rare when other teams would be able to sneak in and win a pennant here and there. And the result was the Red Sox only won one during Ted Williams' time, and during that entire time. And that was in 1946. And they played the St. Louis Cardinals, and the St. Louis Cardinals did something that teams have been banned for doing now, and that's the shift. And they created this thing for Ted Williams, the Ted Williams shift. Actually, the Cleveland Indians, I think, did it during the regular season, but the Red Sox, or the St. Louis Cardinals more famously, put 3 infielders on the right side in the 1946 World Series, and Ted Williams only batted .200 in that series. He couldn't get the ball through. He was a pull hitter. But that doesn't really, diminish the historical greatness of Ted Williams. I mean, what he did during his career through 1960 was absolutely phenomenal. And he had, it was always the big debate back then, baseball-wise, was who's better, Ted Williams or Joe DiMaggio. And it's funny because the year Ted Williams batted .406, he didn't even win MVP. DiMaggio won the MVP that year. But anyway, now, there was only been 2 eras of Red Sox history where the team really struggled. One, of course, was after they sold Babe Ruth all the way up till 1933. Another was in the late 50s and early 60s. It was a relatively short period of time, but they struggled. And one of the reasons they struggled was the Red Sox were the last team in Major League Baseball to integrate. After Jackie Robinson integrated the National League and baseball with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947, Tom Yawkey was their owner of the Red Sox, and he steadfastly refused to integrate. He didn't want to do it. He had a manager that even said straight out, I will not be using any of the N-word players on my team. And while other teams were getting better through integration and supplementing their rosters with these great black ball players, he just would not do it. He finally was the Red Sox even gave Jackie Robinson, before he joined the Dodgers, and Willie Mays tryouts. And the scouts came back, no, these guys will never make it in the major leagues. They don't have what it takes. Jackie Robinson and Willie Mays, right? So anyway, that's just the way they were. And not until 1959, they finally put a kid on the roster we talked about named Pumpsy Green, and he turned out to be a little bit of a disappointment. And in the early 60s, they really, really struggled until they started integrating. But anyway, I'll tell you a little personal story. In early 1967, before the baseball season started, I'm watching a game show called Hollywood Squares. It had just come out. Remember Hollywood Squares? And Peter Marshall was the host, and he said to his contestant, "What's your name and what do you do for a living?" And he said, my name is Dick Williams, and I am going to manage the Red Sox this year." And I'm like, hey, look at that, the manager of the Red Sox is on Hollywood Squares. And no one thought much about the Red Sox that year because they finished almost in last place in 1966. And Yawkey was threatening to move the team because he was like, oh, we need to build a new ballpark. And he was threatening to move the team unless they built him a new ballpark. And it turns out the problem was not Fenway Park. The problem was the team was lousy. That's why they weren't drawing. And in 1967, the fans proved it, that the problem was not Fenway Park. The problem was the team was bad. And in 67, it all came together. And it was really the greatest pennant race in baseball history, ever. There's not even debatable. Going into the last weekend of the 1967 season, the Red Sox, Twins, Tigers, the White Sox, Twins, Tigers, and Minnesota, they played, were all alive for the pennant. And on the last day of the season, 3 of those teams, the White Sox had been eliminated, 3 of those teams were still alive for the pennant: the Red Sox, Twins, and Tigers. And the Red Sox played the Twins that day, and the Tigers had a doubleheader against Anaheim, or well, the California Angels. And this is how that went down. By the way, that was the year that Carl Yastrzemski maybe had one of the greatest seasons in baseball history. He won the Triple Crown that year. He could do no wrong. And in that game against the Twins that they had to win, the last game of the year, he went 4 for 4. Yastrzemski was amazing. But anyway, here's a little bit more about that last weekend, that last day.
And so, with one game to decide the pennant, Minnesota's ace Dean Chance was going against Boston's ace Jim Lonborg.
It might be a little kid's dream to be on the mound for the final game of the season, a game that you have to win to go on to the World Series.
Boston started out the game tight. The Twins scored 2 early runs, but in the 6th, Lonborg surprised everyone.
As I walked up to home plate, I took a glance down the third baseline where Cesar Tovar, I think, was playing. And he was playing back quite a bit. I mean, he just figures here's a pitcher coming up. And the thought just occurred to me that I can lay down a bunt and I can beat it out.
Good bunt. And he can't play it. A bunt single for Lonborg to lead off the 6th inning.
On the next 3 consecutive pitches, we got base hits.
And this is a base hit to center. Swinging away. Base hit to left. Lonborg being held at third base, and they're loaded up. Base hit to center. Lonborg scores. Adair will score. It's tied up. The Sox kept up their momentum. They took the lead on Ken Harrelson's bouncer to short, and then a wild pitch brought home Yastrzemski with an insurance run. The drama continued into the 9th. The lead was still 2 runs as all of New England prayed with every pitch.
Little soft pop-up. Petroselli will take it. He does. The ball game is over. The Red Sox win.
Within seconds, we were all there together as teammates. And then seconds after that, the people came on the field. For some reason, it seemed like a good thing to do just to stay on the field and enjoy the moment, because we had done it. But the more I stayed on the field, the more I realized that I didn't know any of these people that were surrounding me, and we were headed towards right field. And then all of a sudden it got scary, because they were going to right field, and I wanted to go back to the clubhouse.
Once in the clubhouse, the Red Sox waited for the outcome of the 2nd game of the Tigers-Angels doubleheader. If the Tigers lost, the pennant would belong to Boston.
We were sitting listening to the radio, and it was just as tense listening to our radio as probably playing the game itself against the Twins.
Then as the game started to progress and outs were being made and more cheers, the crescendo of the whole thing built up.
I'll never forget it because Dick McAuliffe hit into a game-ending double play.
His first double play of the season. Game's over, and we're the champions.
Okay, that was a great moment. They probably would have won it all if it wasn't for Bob Gibson. Bob Gibson was the ace pitcher and one of the greatest pitchers of all time for St. Louis, and he was just absolutely dominant, and they lost in 7 games in the World Series. But it really saved, it was just an amazing accomplishment, because the Red Sox almost finished last in '66. So it was phenomenal. Let me give you your next trivia question. Here it is. In the very, very late 70s and early 80s, the Red Sox had a power-hitting third baseman. And he had a lot of home runs. And he later became their manager for a short time. He was also, during his college career, a quarterback at the University of Alabama. He was their quarterback. What was his name?
I'm going to let either one of you want to know. I do know. Butch Hobson.
Butch Hobson, there you go. Yeah, good job. Okay. Wow, you guys are kicking butt. Now, some things happened after '67 that really prevented the Red Sox from following up and maintaining their greatness. In fact, for the next through '74, they almost had the same record. Like every year, they'd have a winning record, but barely, and they didn't really contend for championships, but they were a winning team. But several things happened. First of all, Jim Lonborg had a skiing accident after that '67 season, and he was never really the same pitcher again. He ended up with Milwaukee. And you know, they just they had a hitter, a slugger, a young slugger who we're going to talk about now, named Tony Conigliaro, and he was special. He actually led the American League in home runs at age 20, and in '67 he was doing great. And in August of '67, they're facing the California Angels, and they had a pitcher, kind of like a sidearm pitcher, 3/4, named Jack Hamilton, and he threw really, really hard. And Tony Conigliaro used to like to crowd the plate, and he got hit in the eye with a Jack Hamilton pitch, and he was really never the same again. He missed the 1968 season. He came back in '69 and had a really good year though, but he was never quite the same, and it was very tragic, and his career petered out, and his life petered out, and he died in his mid-40s. And here's a little bit about Tony Conigliaro and the impact. And he was a local kid too. He was from Swampscott, Massachusetts, which I believe is like a suburb of Boston. But anyway, so Tony was like the local hero.
He was the local.
The Sox were involved in the greatest pennant race in history, and carrying a share of that load was 22-year-old right fielder Tony Conigliaro from Swampscott, Massachusetts. Tony had made the hometown team at the tender age of 19 and had homered in his first Fenway at-bat. In 1965, at the age of 20, Tony had led the American League in home runs. His aggressive style had caused him injuries in the past, but he'd always come back. This night would be different. It's Friday night, the Angels are in town, and spitballer Jack Hamilton is on the mound in the 4th inning. Tony is at the plate, he's 1 for 1. Tony hovered over the plate as the fastball rode up and in toward his head.
Tony just froze. He didn't move at all, and the ball just took off the sails and right up and hit him. He went down to log tunnel.
Some people in the park thought the ball had hit his helmet, but Tony's teammates knew better from the awful sound they'd heard.
Something I'll never forget. The only thing I can compare is maybe if somebody had a melon and just threw it on the floor and you'd hear it squash.
You could tell that it wasn't a thick, that it wasn't like a glancing blow or something. You could tell that it had full impact on full meat. But it wasn't like muscle that would absorb the sound of the baseball hitting the body. There was bone there, and that's something that's entirely different.
As the crowd booed Jack Hamilton, Tony was taken off the field on a stretcher. The ball had hit him on the upper cheekbone, fracturing that bone just below the eye socket. When Tony C. hit the dirt that fateful night, he'd hit 20 home runs in 1967. He'd have to wait 2 years for the chance to hit another. Tony Conigliaro always had a flair for the dramatic. His return to the Red Sox in April 1969 was typical Tony C.
Drive to left center, players back, and it is home run for Conigliaro. Oh, boy, what a story. What a story here. And look at him. Look at that boy as he's going into that dugout there.
Tony would have 2 great seasons after his miraculous comeback, but deteriorating eyesight would end his career for good in 1975, leaving us to wonder about the Tony that might have been.
Well, I saw Tony play, and I don't think there's any question that if he'd had a chance to play out a career, that he would have ranked with the home run hitters, the all-time home run hitters, I believe. He had a natural pull stroke and hit the ball in the air, which is a pretty great gift to have as far as hitting a baseball is concerned.
I was on my way to hitting a lot of home runs, and I sometimes think maybe I could hit as many home runs as Babe Ruth. It did enter my mind.
Tony would find success in the broadcast booth, but tragedy would strike once again after he auditioned for a job for the Red Sox broadcasting position. Tony suffered a massive heart attack while with his brother Billy in 1982.
I asked Tony a question, and he kind of like flinched a little bit, and I asked him again, and he kind of clenched his fist, and I saw a tear come out of his left eye, and his eyes closed. And I just thought he was having trouble breathing.
Tony would be left comatose, then in need of constant care. Tony C. passed away 8 years later, in 1990, just days away from his 45th birthday. In Tony Conigliero's short baseball life for the Red Sox, he was one of the greatest they've ever known. But the Tony C that might have been the greatest that ever played the game. This is...
Okay. Let me give you another trivia question. This is the toughest trivia question because it goes back a ways. Let's see if you can get it, though. In 1945, the Red Sox had a rookie pitcher who won 21 games. The following year, he won 25 games and led the Red Sox, along with Ted Williams, of course, to the pennant. Then he had arm problems, was never the same again. What was his name?
You want me to give it to you?
You got this one good? Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is a tough one.
Boo Ferris.
Boo Ferris. Dave Ferris. Boo Ferris. That is fantastic. Wow. Okay, you guys are 3 for 3 on trivia. Well, he is anyway.
I'm going to share with you guys.
Good job. That was quite amazing. Okay, now, a lot of baseball experts believe that 1975 was the greatest season in baseball history, just in general. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but the number one reason was because it was such a dramatic World Series between the Red Sox and the Cincinnati Reds, the Big Red Machine. That year, the Red Sox had maybe the greatest rookie duo in the history of baseball with Fred Lynn and Jim Rice. And Fred Lynn was really the star attraction that year. I mean, he was a MVP candidate, and the thing was, though, a lot of people, best baseball experts, and they were right, believed that Jim Rice was going to end up being a better player than Fred Lynn, and they were right. Jim Rice was a Hall of Famer. Fred Lynn was a great player, and he had a great career, but Jim Rice was actually a little bit better. But they had a fabulous run, and they led the Red Sox that year to the pennant, and they played the Reds in the World Series. And in Game 6, one of the most famous games ever played, Carlton Fisk, they were down 3-2. They went extra innings, and Carlton Fisk hit that famous home run off the foul pole in left field and did his famous air traffic controller bid to keep the ball fair and wheel the ball fair, and it actually did go there. And here's that moment. Whenever you see baseball highlights, like the greatest moments in baseball history, they always show this, and I want to show it as well. You don't see fans coming out on the field anymore.
We will have a 7th game in this 1975 World Series. Carlton Fisk becomes the first player in the series to hit one over the wall into the net. Red Sox win it 7-6 in 12 innings. And Carlton Fisk had a lot of little boy in him right there, Joe. He took one step, knew it was going to be close, he knew it was gone, and it was dancing in the streets all the way around. Johnny Pesky meets him at first base, and he is dancing as he gets to second base.
It came very close to hitting that foul pole. We'll see how close.
There it is. Pick it up as it comes, and there it is. It did hit it, and Foster did come up with the ball. So there will be a 7th game here tomorrow night.
What a World Series, Joe Garagiola, have we seen here between these two clubs. It's fitting that we have a 7th game, you know.
It had to go to the 7th game, Dick, because they've battled and battled. And now tomorrow night it'll be Cullen. Bill Lee, this crowd, refusing to leave. Amazing. Southern Ball Club battled back. They've been up and down, clutch plays, clutch catches. And they are just dancing in the streets here as Carlton Fisk brings a 7th game On a body English for Carl V. Now watch it. How many steps does he take? One. He waits to see it. Get over, get over. He knew it. There it is. I tell you, one of the more.
I always show that video to that point because that moment is so ingrained in people's memories. But anyway, I want to give you another trivia question before I forget it, because I did this program last time. I forgot this trivia question. Now I remembered it again. And it's a good question, so I want to ask you. Ted Williams, 9 years after he retired, he became the manager of a woe-begone Major League franchise that was really struggling to win. And he turned them around and became manager of the year in 1969. He managed that team for several more years, didn't have the same success, but in '69 he was manager of the year with a major league team that had been struggling, and he turned them into a winner. What was that team?
Washington Senators.
I knew it. That is right, the Washington Senators. And he stayed with that team after they moved to Texas and became the Texas Rangers in 1972. But he never had that same level of success at all that he did in his first year there. Okay, wow. I want to give you just a side trivia question, just see if you know this.
Yeah, please.
The Senators had a really bad hitting shortstop that for 1 year he turned into a 280 hitter. Do you remember the name of that shortstop?
Senators? No, I can't say.
Okay, yeah. I finally got you. He batted like 285 that year. You might remember him. His name was Eddie Brinkman.
Oh, I do remember the name. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, he was like a 200 hitter every year, and Ted Williams turned him around.
Did he ever play for Detroit?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he played for the Tigers as well. Yeah, Eddie Brinkman. Okay, now, I hate to do it to you folks, but I'm going to have to show you 1986. There was, the Red Sox were back in the World Series, and they had the opposite situation that they had in '75. They were actually up 3-2 in the World Series against the New York Mets. And they were on the brink, they were on the Eddie Brinkman of winning it all. They got 2 runs in the 10th inning. They were up two. They had a relief pitcher named Calvin Schiraldi, who was a young kid, and he was a talented pitcher. And he got the first 2 outs in the 10th inning. They were 1 out from winning the World Series. 1 out. And then single. Another single. They brought in a run. Then John McNamara, the manager, brought in Bob Stanley, the veteran reliever, and you'll see what happens here, and you'll see how it. And we'll talk about Bill Buckner in a little bit.
Because they had Knight really picked up and Stanley didn't see him. There it is again. You see, he just reaches for the ball. Down goes Mookie and kind of sailed inside. And here comes Barrett in to talk to Stanley because had Mookie hit just a weak ground ball, Barrett was way out of position because they had a good chance to get Knight at second base.
Can you believe this ball game at Shea?
Oh, brother.
So the winning run is at second base with 2 out, 3-2 to Mookie Wilson. Little roller up along first, behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
I'm sorry to have to show you that. Now, a couple things about that. Bill Buckner was a really good fielding first baseman, very good defensive first baseman. The problem was he had bad knees by that time. And John McNamara has been criticized, rightly so, for not having replaced him after the Red Sox took a 2-run lead, not having replaced him at first base with someone like Dave Stapleton or whoever, a better defensive player at that time. Now, another thing that John McNamara has been criticized for, the Red Sox in Game 7 had a lead. They had a 3-run lead in that game, and it started to melt away. And McNamara brought Calvin Schiraldi back into that game. Calvin Schiraldi was an emotional mess because he blamed himself for losing Game 6. And he was mentally and emotionally not prepared to pitch Game 7. But they brought him in anyway, and he just got pounded. The Mets just pounded him, and that was it. The Mets won the World Series, and the Red Sox, a lot of people that didn't believe in the curse of the Bambino started to believe in it by that time. They were like, okay, we're never going to win anything. And because, the Red Sox had not won a World Series since 1918. And they didn't until 2004. Now we're going to start talking about some good stuff. I am going to show you the guy that I think is the most talented pitcher, maybe not most successful, the most talented pitcher the Red Sox ever had. And we're talking, you know about Roger Clemens and, even Cy Young way back when. But that's Pedro Martinez. What I want you to look out for, what makes a great pitcher great is, to a great extent, is his movement, the ball movement, late movement on the pitches. That's what prevents hitters from squaring up pitches, is late movement. And not only could Pedro Martinez throw the ball in the upper 90s and had a great fastball, but he had incredible movement on his pitches. Even his fastball moved. And so what I want you to look out for here is I'm not going to show you one particular game or anything. I want to show you, just watch closely how his pitches move when they approach the plate. The greatest pitching performance I ever saw in person as a sports writer was delivered by Pedro Martinez. I believe it was 99. I should remember that. Yeah, I think it was 99. And the Red Sox were playing the Indians. I was covering the Indians back then, and the Red Sox were playing them in the playoffs. And it was a close series. This was the final game of the series, and the Red Sox needed to win. And it was like a 7-6 ball game in the third inning. Both teams were hitting like crazy, and the Red Sox were up by 1 run. Pedro Martinez came in relief because they wanted, even though he was a starting pitcher, came in relief. And the Indians at that time had one of the greatest lineups in the history of baseball. Albert Bell, Jim Thome, Manny Ramirez. I mean, they were like, well, they didn't have Albert Bell at that time, but they were loaded. Roberto Alomar. And Pedro Martinez completely shut them down. He pitched, I think, 6 shutout innings, and he struck out like 9 guys, and he didn't give up a hit. And he just blew away one of the greatest lineups ever. That was one of the greatest pitching performances I've ever seen. Now, let's get to 2004, because that's where the fun really began. And in 2004, the Yankees had been torturing the Red Sox over the years. I had a friend in Cleveland. That's not the amazing part of the story. The amazing part of the story is I had a friend in Cleveland that he was a huge Red Sox fan. His dad was a Red Sox fan. He was a big Red Sox fan. He even had a Yaz I think it was Yaz 44 or something, license plate on his car. And he told me one day, he said, isn't it a shame that the Red Sox didn't clinch that series against the Yankees at Fenway Park? Wouldn't that have been special? And I said, no. It was way better that the Red Sox beat the Yankees in Yankee Stadium, where they had been tortured so many times, where the Yankee fans were crying in the stands, and the Yankees were stunned in the dugout. It was so much more appropriate that they beat them at Yankee Stadium. It was great. And what happened in that series, of course, as you probably remember, they were down 3-0. They were lost one of those games, I think 19-8. They were just getting crushed by the Yankees. And they were down by 1 run in the 9th inning, and Dave Roberts was on first base, and he stole second base just barely, just by a whisker he got in there, and he scored. And I want to show you the point where it went into extra innings, and Big Papi, David Ortiz, one of the greatest clutch hitters who ever lived, did this.
Ortiz into deep right field. Back is Sheffield. We'll see you later tonight. A 5-hour, 2-minute game and worth every second of it for the Boston Red Sox. 4 huge outs picked up by Les Canning. A leadoff hit by Ramirez, and David Ortiz sends everybody home just over 5 hours after it began.
The Yankees had been pitching him inside all night. He finally connected. A guy who won the division series against the Anaheim Angels wins this game here tonight.
They took that one the opposite way over the Green Monster, and this one, he pulled to right.
Okay. Now, after they beat the Yankees in Game 7 and miraculously won that series, everybody knew they shouldn't even have bothered playing the World Series. I'm sorry. Everybody knew the Red Sox had so much momentum on their side, and they were like the team of destiny at that point, that they were going to beat the Cardinals, and they did. They swept them in that series. The moment that series against the Cardinals really went into the Red Sox pocket was late that game. It was a 9-9 game, and they had a rather ordinary hitter named Mark Bellhorn who stepped to the plate at Fenway Park, and this is what Mark Bellhorn did to really, keep the momentum on the Red Sox side that they never lost.
Into right field again, down the line, near the pole, home run, Bellhorn. A 2-run shot, and it's 11-9 Boston in Game 1.
Love that dance. That's my favorite part of that video.
This one with much more significance. Off the fencing along the foul pole down the right field line to put Boston back on top 11-9.
Okay, last trivia question. Here it is. What cigar-smoking Cuban pitcher from the early 1970s I know you know it already.
That's a cigar-smoking pitcher.
Yeah, he used to turn his back to home plate when he pitched. Sometimes he had so much personality. I love that guy. I remember him pitching for the Indians as well.
That's right. He pitched for the Indians.
And the Twins for a very short time. What was his name?
El Tiante.
El Tiante, Louis Tiant. You know what? You guys congratulate. Well, yeah. it's very rare when I get a group that gets all 5 trivia questions right, especially a small group like this. So congratulations, everyone. I'm going to include you in this victory, all of you, because you encouraged him. If it wasn't for your encouragement, you might not have gotten all 5 right. So I want to include you in on that. Now, we talked about Red Sox Nation. And Red Sox Nation is not limited to New England. Red Sox Nation is the nation, and even part of the world. There's Red Sox fans everywhere. And I want to prove it to you right here. This is in 2018. This is game 1, late in that game in the World Series against the Dodgers in Los Angeles. And you're going to see Steve Pearce, another rather ordinary hitter, but he had this big hit. And listen to the crowd. This is in LA. This is 3,000 miles from Boston, and it sounds like it's at Fenway Park, because that's how many Boston fans are at this game in LA. And I guarantee that most of them are transplants, not from Boston. So you'll hear that. Listen to that crowd. That's in LA.
8-4 Boston in the ninth. Well, in the 8th against Kansas, he has a homer to tie the game, and this right here, best piece of hitting. Didn't try to do too much, he splits the gap, but right there you could sense. Thought everyone might come out of the dugout for the Red Sox, breaking this game open.
Great stuff, great stuff. Of course, the Red Sox have been the most successful, really, franchise in Major League Baseball since the turn of the century. With 4 World Series championships. Now what I want to do is I want to turn the program over to you wonderful people and open it up to any questions or comments. We can talk about the Red Sox, or we can talk about Major League Baseball and the direction it's going, or we can talk about horseradish, or whatever you want to talk about. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know.
How do you feel about Luis Arraez chasing Ted Williams' record?
Oh yeah, it's interesting, but I think he's down to 386. And that just makes, when you're trying to bat 400 or 406, but 400 in general, it makes it really, really tough once you start getting down to the 370s, 380s, because you got to get really hot to get back there. You got to have some 4 for 4 games and whatever. But I think it's great. I love it. I remember when George Brett, Rod Carew.
The library will be closing in 20 minutes at 5 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
Please check out your materials at the main desk. Thank you.
Well, that's right, close at 5 o'clock. I remember when Rod Carew and George Brett went after, and John Olerud for a short time, went after that record. So, yeah, I think it's great. I hope he does it. I mean, it would be really exciting if he's able to get up back in the 395, in August and September and stuff. That'll get really, really exciting. But if he drops into the 370s, it's probably not going to happen. But it would be great. I'd love it. He's a magician with that bat. Anybody else? Any questions or comments?
What do you think needs to change for the Red Sox to improve?
Pitching. I'll tell you what. When I like that Bayo kid. I don't know if you're pronouncing it. Bayo. He's going to be good. Yeah. But and I liked Tanner Houck for a while, but I don't know what really he's.
I like Houck too.
Yeah, but when I saw on opening day that Corey Kluber was their starting pitcher on opening day, and I know all about Corey Kluber. He had 2 Cy Young Awards in Cleveland, but he was done 2-3 years ago. He was done. I thought pretty much close to done. And when he was their opening day starter, I'm like, okay, yeah. And with Chris Sale's injury history and everything, but if they ever get a couple really, really strong starting pitchers, they always hit. That team always hits. I mean,
the hitting has not been as good this year.
Yeah, not as good, but I like Turner, and I like Verdugo, and of course Devers, and Devers. I mean, his batting average is a little down, but he's driving in a lot of runs, and he's been hot lately, and they've been hot lately. One problem with the Red Sox is they're in the wrong division. I mean, they're 5 games over 500 and they're in last place. It's crazy. And then the Indians, the Guardians, are in first place and they're a 500 team. They'd be in last in the East. I think Major League Baseball should do something. It just doesn't seem fair.
It's just,
the East is always so strong.
I think it's just a bad year.
Yeah, but the Central Division, like, you know, the American League Central is a joke. I'm glad the Indians, I'm still a Guardians Indians fan, and I'm glad they're in that division. But I love the Red Sox. I always root for the Red Sox, and I hope they can maybe, you know, they can still get into the playoffs as a wild card team, even if they finish last. That's still possible, and maybe they will. You never know.
Just mentioned Pedro, I think, is tutoring that Balin guy.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think so.
Okay.
I think he's had an interest in him. And
He's been their best pitcher lately.
Yeah,
you know.
they're both Dominicans, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Well, anyway, one last thing, because I know you guys got to close down, and I'm going to tell you. With the holidays only 6 months away, you might want to start thinking about what you're going to get your family and friends for the holidays. And real quick, I won more than 45 awards as a sports writer. And I had to pay the judges, but I still won the award. But anyway, this is like 25 chapters of the greatest and most interesting teams and players and events and moments in Red Sox history. It's the only book that covers their entire history going back to 1901. And I'm also a pop culture historian. And I wrote the only book in which the greatest cartoon characters are ranked. I ranked the greatest 100 cartoon characters of all time.
Who's number one?
Bugs Bunny. And it was a real, in fact, I told my co-authors, I said, Bugs Bunny's number one, right? Let's move on. He said, yeah, let's move on.
Where's the Roadrunner?
Roadrunner, yeah, oh yeah, with Wile E. Coyote, and together. A lot of the Warner Brothers characters made the book Porky Pig and Daffy Duck. Daffy Duck's actually number 4. But anyway, the book's a blast. It's a full color coffee table book. This is a $45 book, and I'm selling it for $30. So there you go. And I autograph and I personalize all my books for free. I'm letting you in on a secret. My autograph adds 3 cents to the value of these books. So you could buy this one for $20 and this one for $30, and you could sell it for $20.03 and $30.03. So there you go. But the book's a blast, and I autograph and personalize them. And if you have anyone in your life that might like that Red Sox book or the Celebration of Animation book, I'll be glad to personalize it for them. And I take cash, credit, or check. So any of the above. There you go. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for
appreciate it.
coming and give us all that information.